Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Double Digit Hockey Show. I am your host, John Easthope, and I thank you for joining me today whenever you're listening to the show. Today, I got a great guest, special guest lined up for you today. He is the host of HNIC in Canada, does some work for Sportsnet as well. It's David Amber. David, how are you today?
Hey, John. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on very much. So lots to get into on the show today, lots of odds and ends I want to talk to you about, but I wanted to start with the Olympics. We just went through the Olympics, obviously. We saw good and bad for Team Canada. Let's start with the men's side of things. Kind of fell flat for them. What did you make of the men's Olympic team?
Well, I think a lot of the countries, you go into it and you don't really know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mishmash of players drawn from all different parts of the globe, essentially. There's Canadians playing in Europe, there's Canadians in the ECHL and the AHL, some in the NCAA, and they kind of pull them from all these directions and hope there's this instant chemistry. And it didn't connect this time. And I think the Canadian team maybe skewed a little bit on the side of experience, the Desharnais and the Eric Stahl, and they certainly had a couple of young, superstars in the making. As well, but generally they kind of pulled from a more experienced group of players. And, philosophically, it didn't work for Canada. But having said that, the U.S. pulled a number of young players from the NCAA, UCHL, et cetera, and sort of said, let's mash these young guys together. And that didn't produce a medal for them either. So, it's such a crapshoot. And, one thing that's kind of nice, if I'm going to find a silver lining, because I know it didn't work out for Canada the way people in Canada had hoped, is it was nice to see teams like Slovakia, like Denmark, non-traditional powerhouses, play pretty well and be competitive. And in Slovakia's case, win their first Olympic medal. So that's very cool. I'll say, though, as much as it's nice to have that opportunity and that platform for some of the guys that were, names we hadn't heard of necessarily or hadn't been sort of in the forefront of our hockey minds. It was nice to give them that opportunity. I miss the best on best.
Me too.
I really do. Having been there in 2002 when Canada took gold in Salt Lake, having been there in Sochi in 2014 as well to see it live when Canada took gold in a pretty impressive fashion.
Yeah.
It was the best on the best. There was just something to that, right? It was really like, I don't know, you could be emotionally connected in a different way because you just felt like this really meant, that we were the best hockey nation. And so it's a little bit of, it lost to me a little bit of the luster. It's an inexact science and it didn't work out for Canada, but certainly it was great to see Finland. They are such a powerful force, hey, John, because they just compete on such a hard level. So it was really nice to see them come from behind and win that gold medal.
I'm glad you mentioned the Slovaks there as well, with that incredible story of that team and how they came through, and a really good job there by a former NHLer putting that team together. Slatan was a really good job with that Slovakian team. Maybe speak a little bit about what you saw from Team Slovakia and maybe why they were so successful in your eyes.
Well, one of the coolest videos I remember during the Olympics was when the Slovaks, surprisingly shocked the U.S. in that shootout.
Yes.
And, people woke up that morning and said, oh, my God, the Americans lost to the Slovaks. And just because the Americans looked so good during the round robin,
right.
And people weren't really, people were kind of sleeping on Slovakia a little bit. And the video that Miro Shatan put out from his hocky,
cool.
camp, you saw it, hey, John, with the kids, and they're throwing their gloves in the air and they're celebrating, and it just shows you there really is a great global game. And, even though there was heartbreak for the U.S., that there was this feeling in Slovakia, hey, we're kind of a forgotten hockey nation.
Yeah.
And you know what? They've done so much over the years. They have put in so many star players into the National Hockey League. I can't really speak so much about their Olympic team because, quite frankly, I didn't watch a ton of the Olympics with the NHL running concurrently.
Right.
We've been pretty busy. In fact, very busy. Carolyn Cameron was off doing the Olympics, headlining some of our coverage at Sportsnet. So I jumped in on her Wednesday night shows as well. So it was a busy time. Always have to spend the night watching hockey games, specifically NHL games, to be sort of on top of the pulse and the heartbeat of what's happening around the league. But what I saw of the Slovakian team, it looked like they were very well coached, very disciplined, and they sort of had that chemistry maybe that was lacking in some of the other countries where you're drawing players from all these different places, where Slovakia seemed to be a little bit more, have better synergy going into the tournament. And in a small tournament where there's no margins for error, John, I think having synergy and chemistry matters so much more, sometimes maybe more than the talent level.
We Adam Ruzicka of the Flames was on the Flames TV, and the smile on his face speaking about how good Slovakia was just speaks to the level that they take it compared to how we do here in Canada. We found our own measure of success, though, at the Olympics on the women's side. You mentioned best on best. We got that with Canada and the U.S. So there's kind of a two-parter here. What did you make of Canada versus U.S. in the gold medal? And then what did you make of the tournament play side of the women's that you'd be able to catch?
Well, the first part of your question, Canada, U.S. didn't disappoint. To me, it's really become not just one of the best rivalries in hockey, but really one of the best rivalries in sport, because there's two nations back and forth, back and forth. The games are so hard, competitively fought. I know Canada beat the U.S. in the round robin portion, but if it wasn't for Desbiens, it might have been an American win. I mean, 51 saves in that victory. I'll admit, Wednesday I was hosting a show and we had on Jennifer Botterill and Cassie Campbell-Pascal to discuss the gold medal game, which was just a few hours away. And I had this nervous energy, and we started the interview, and Cassie was almost like looking at me like, "What's wrong with this guy?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just up for tonight's game," because I really love, first of all, it's a winner take all. And then I love the fact, the history of these two nations, right? 6-time meeting for a gold medal. Again, I was there in 2002 when Canada went in as the prohibitive underdog, right? The American team had rolled over Canada during those play-in games leading up. We always have that sort of friendly rivalry games meeting up to the Olympics. And the U.S., I think, had won like 7 in a row or some crazy number like that. The U.S. was, the defending gold medalist from 1998. They had arguably the better team, and they were on home soil. Everything was pointing to the U.S. winning, but Canada, in an incredibly hard-fought match, and they had to deal with a bunch of horrible penalty calls back then as well.
Yes.
They won the gold medal. And so I had this nervous energy because I thought Canada was the better team, John, but I also thought anything could happen in a one-game showdown. We saw that in 2002 when the Americans should have maybe taken gold. So I had some nervous energy, but Marie-Philip Poulin, she is beyond clutch. I mean, it's just amazing what she is able to do, right? Like, it's funny, we talk about Justin Williams in the NHL, Mr. Game 7, and he's earned that sort of really nice label to his game. But Marie-Philip Poulin is on a whole nother level, right? Just, she rises to the occasion. She's completely unflappable. And it wasn't just her. The whole team, top to bottom, you could argue, and it's so hard to compare teams and eras, but this maybe was the most dominant Canadian team we've seen. They just, they beat up on teams. They, didn't trail. They were always in control of the game. And even in that final game, they were in control of it. Even after the first goal by Spooner got called off because of the offside, everyone still felt an air of confidence. And then a couple minutes later, Sarah Nurse legitimately scores, and there it is. It's 1-0, and the rest is history. As far as the overall bracket goes, John, I think it's fun. I think it's fun to watch these nations inching closer. Finland, again, we gave props to them for winning the gold in men's. Well, they grabbed the bronze for the women, and they're a very competitive nation. Excited to see the teams that Sweden and Switzerland, et cetera, can put on the ice. I just feel like we're moving in the right direction.
I agree.
And, for that sentiment of, oh, God, it's just 2 teams. That's not true at all. I mean, we see this in other sports as well, right? Like in basketball, we saw this with the U.S. men just destroying everyone. And then suddenly Spain and Argentina and a few other nations got the infrastructure in place and got the interest in place, and we're able to make a run. And now we've seen Canada, our national basketball team, is quite good as well. And I think that's where we're coming with these other nations. We need these nations to invest in the women's game, be advocates for the women's game, help grow the women's game. And that's where, you're going to start to see the Scandinavian countries and other countries in Asia maybe rise up and legitimately challenge Canada and the U.S. So we're moving in the right direction. The hockey is fierce. It's hard. It's fast. It's competitive. And it's a really fun tournament to keep an eye on.
I love the Olympics. It was a lot of fun to watch Team Canada and how resilient they were. They bounced back from that offside goal in the gold medal game, come back and able to control that game. And you mentioned it, Poulin, an amazing player, absolutely amazing. We speak of amazing players. We speak of Canada. You don't have to stretch too far to talk about Sidney Crosby after this. He came across a milestone, 500 goals. Pittsburgh is on some sort of roll here, apart from the game against Carolina they just played. Speak a little bit maybe about Crosby and what 500 goals means in your eyes and the job that he's done leading the Penguins.
It's the latest sort of crowning jewel to this, Hall of Fame resume. And I said this a couple of years ago. I mean, in my eyes, and there'll be people who argue this, and it's one of those arguments you can just have, sitting at a bar having a beer with a buddy. But to me, Sidney Crosby is a top 5 all-time NHL player or hockey player. And you look at his resume, all he's done is won. And part of it starts out when he was 11, 12 years old out in Nova Scotia. The amount of pressure, the amount of expectations heaped upon this young man, all he's done is lived up to everything, right? Like it would have been, he might have felt the weight of the world on him, right? And all he's done is won. He's won every significant individual record, and he's won every significant team record. World Hockey Championship, World Junior Championship, World Cup of Hockey, Olympics, 3-time Stanley Cup. All he's done is won. And people forget he missed over 3 seasons worth of injuries. I shouldn't say they forget, but 500 goals means a lot to a lot of guys. This was a guy who we didn't know, if his career was going to be cut short. I mean, what was it? 2010 Winter Classic or 2011 Winter Classic out in Heinz Field. And, he took the elbow and we thought, okay, well, that might be it for him. He might not ever be the Sidney Crosby we had hoped for. And what did he do? He comes back with a vengeance. Brian Burke, we had him on our show on Thursday in our Lead Penguin show, and we asked him about Sidney Crosby, and he said, if your best player is also your hardest working player, he really sets the standard for everyone else. He's never been one to sort of rest on his ability and been satisfied with what he's accomplished. And think about how easy that would be, right? You look at his resume, it'd be very easy to go, well, I'm Sidney Crosby. I've made more money than God. I've won everything. I've come here to win. I don't need to be the first one on the ice and the last one off, but he's still that guy, and he works on his craft. And maybe, John, when we talk about 500 goals, Sidney Crosby's not known as a goal scorer. No. And that was almost put down, especially because he and Ovechkin came in at the same time, and Ovechkin's this legendary world-class, greatest scorer of all time. So it's always been, well, he doesn't score the way Ovechkin scores. When Crosby put his mind to it to not necessarily be a facilitator, not necessarily be, always the guy distributing, I'm going to work on putting the puck in the net. He won 2 Rocket Richard trophies, right? In all of his accomplishments, maybe the thing that's forgotten the most is, oh yeah, he did lead the league in scoring twice. That's not an insignificant thing. I mean, there's only been X amount of guys who've led the league in scoring more than one time, and he's one of those guys. So I think if Sidney Crosby wanted to, he could have given up maybe parts of his game as a facilitator and a guy who got everyone involved, and he could have been, a perennial 50-goal scorer. I think if that was his goal, I think he could have done that. So I look at him as a top 5 all-time player, and really 500 goals is just the latest milestone for him. And listen, don't sleep on him. This could be, he might be staring down a 4th Stanley Cup before we're all said and done, because that's a very good Pittsburgh team, and he's the catalyst that leads everyone into the battle.
A lot of players, when they get to this level, are known as the best in the organization, the best the franchise has ever had. He's in top here to be known as that. He's in that conversation because he's got Mario Lemieux to compete with, but it's so incredible the job that he does and the professionalism that he brings to the ice every day, every shift that he works, and it's incredible to see. And he's pulling this Penguins team along here. They're in a big dogfight for that division along with Carolina. We saw them face off Sunday night. Carolina looked pretty comfortable. What do you make of that 2-headed race there for that division?
And don't forget the Rangers, because the Rangers with Shesterkin and Fox and their core group, Panarin, etc. They are going to be a formidable team in a tough outcome playoff time as well. I'm interested to see, we're 1 month away from the trade deadline. I'm interested to see the final product for Carolina, the final product for Pittsburgh. And, Elliot Friedman asked Brian Burke about this when he appeared on set. And, he's just said, look, salary cap is an issue. They can't just go there and grab, this player and that player. It's not going to be that simple. They're going to have to be creative. They're going to have to be smart about it. But I do think there's going to be some tinkering for the Penguins. And I do think there's going to be some tinkering for Carolina. I think Carolina is a very good team. I think one element that they maybe are wondering about is their overall toughness. And I don't mean fighting and all that. I just mean they played a game against Florida, what was it, about a week and a half ago, and Florida started to get very physical with them. They seem very comfortable playing that brand of hockey. I'm not 100% sure Carolina 1-20 is as comfortable playing that sort of barnyard brawl type style of hockey. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if their management is looking to add a little bit there. So I'm interested to see the final products, but they're two very good teams, and they're two teams that have their sights. It's not about getting to the playoffs. It's not about winning a round. It's about, winning a championship. So I'm very interested to see how the playoffs are going to shake down. The regular season, especially in the East, maybe hasn't been as perfect as we'd like because barring something unforeseen, John, we know the 8 teams that are going to be in the East in the playoffs. So the races haven't been as compelling maybe as we'd hoped. But once the playoffs begin, my God, some of the matchups we might see, right?
Yes.
I mean, we might see Carolina, Pittsburgh in the first round if the Rangers win that division. We might see Toronto, Tampa in the first round, or Toronto, Florida in the first round. We might see Tampa, Florida in the first round. So there's some incredible matchups, and there's not even if you win your division, you got to deal maybe with Boston or Washington. I mean, these are not easy matchups. So it's going to make for some fantastic theater, and I think the next month will be really interesting because I do think there's going to be some tweaking for these rosters. And you look at some of the big names out there, the Mark Giordanos, the Claude Giroux, the Phil Kessel, you add a little bit here and there. It could be very interesting. Marc-Andre Fleury, if a team, he's been linked with Washington for some time. How would that change the balance of power if suddenly Marc-Andre Fleury is sitting in Washington with a team? The goaltending has been, questionable at times. So it's great. It's going to be a really fun sort of marathon or sprint, I should say, to the finish. And then we'll see what we have with teams like Carolina and Pittsburgh.
For sure. You mentioned the races there, and the race for the playoffs might be over, but the race for the top spot, the race for division wins, division leads is quite there. And we talk about how good Carolina is, and what we see out of Pittsburgh. And we'll get to Toronto in a little bit here, but let's talk about the Florida Panthers. This team has come a long way from what we saw 3-4 years ago, struggling to get into the playoffs. Now they're battling themselves for that President's Trophy. They're leading this conference by points at the moment. What have you made of the Florida Panthers and how they're seemingly steamrolling these other teams?
Boy, they're fast. And you're right, you used the word steamrolling. I think twice this year they put up 9 goals. One of them was against Tampa Bay. They come to you at waves, and you talk to players, and they go, they're the fastest team in the league. And they have incredible depth offensively, like incredible depth, right? When you look at guys like Verhaeghe and Duclair, like it's not even just about Barkov and Huberdeau and the usual suspects. And you go down the line and you go, Bennett and Reinhardt, et cetera. So they have a number of guys who could beat you offensively. There's a toughness there as well. And they're getting the Sergei Bobrovsky, who's the 2-time Vezina guy. I mean, they're not getting, the Sergei Bobrovsky from his first year with the Panthers, where you didn't know what the heck was going to happen with him. And if they can get that sort of world-class goaltending on top of that offense, I mean, look out for that team. And the thing is, I talk about the tweaking and everything else. They're there to win. This is the year they look at as a championship year. And one thing that I've heard Elliot Friedman talk about is don't sleep on Florida to be trying to add a guy like Claude Giroux to the lineup. It's not that they need his points, but his veteran leadership would help.
Right.
Granted, they have Joe Thornton. They have ample veteran leadership, and they have Gudas and a bunch of other guys who can do that. But then they also have sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We were talking about adding parts. Giroux would be that another face-off guy, right?
Right.
So, I mean, you can never have enough guys like that in your lineup. And if they can somehow pull off something significant at the trade deadline or before, man, that's going to be really interesting to see. Because I think they might be, you can make an argument for a few teams, but they might be the best team in the East.
I like the Florida Panthers as well for another reason. We talk about that defense that they have there, and everyone automatically goes to Ekblad, but they forget that Forsling and Weegar have become such good support pieces on that back end for the Panthers, making them deeper on the back end. It's going to be interesting to see which way they go at the trade deadline. We'd also talk about trades as well, and the Toronto Maple Leafs pulled off a trade. They bring in a defenseman here. They bolster their lineup. What do you make of Toronto, the move, and where they sit themselves in that division behind the two Florida teams?
Well, I think they had to make a move, and I think credit to Kyle Dubas. he hit some home runs in the offseason. You know, Michael Bunting has been great.
That was a good one.
David Kampf has really shored up their PK. He's been just sensational and been that sort of shutdown guy they were hoping for on the back end. There's that demarcation between sort of their top six and their bottom six.
Yeah.
What the expectations from those two lines are, or those four lines are, and David Kampf has fit in perfectly. But, you know, Nick Ritchie was a strikeout. And, you know, I think the important thing with moving Ritchie isn't so much getting him out of there this year, and that's important, but it was more next year. He was, you know, ready to make a significant amount of money next year as well. And remember, they got to deal with Jack Campbell, and they've got to find money for Jack Campbell. So if anything, it just loosens the salary cap strain on the team. I think we'll wait and see. Dzingle's a depth guy, you know, proven track record. At some point, he was very good at, you know, certain stints around the NHL, his time in Ottawa. You know, the defenseman they picked up, I think he's known as sort of a stay-at-home defenseman. You know, I've heard, you know, Nick Kypreos talk about this, and I agree with it. You don't win a Stanley Cup with 6 defensemen. You don't win a Stanley Cup with 7 defensemen. You're going to need 8 or 9 defensemen.
Yep.
To get through 4 rounds and the pounding these guys are going to take to get through, you know, let's look at the map for the Leafs to get to the Stanley Cup final. They're going to have to go through the likes of a Tampa team, a Florida team, potentially a Boston team, potentially a Washington team. I mean, we're talking about big, physical, strong, fast teams. Their defense are going to take a pounding. And what we've seen the last 2 years is Jake Muzzin's been injured during the playoffs and hasn't been able to finish the season. You're going to need 7, 8, 9, 10 defensemen. And having another guy that they feel comfortable with in that setting is important. So I look at it as a very good move for the Leafs. I don't think Kyle Dubas is done. I think he gets very creative. He's trying to find ways to add depth. It's not about adding to the core and to the nucleus, but it's adding to the depth to understand, you know, they could use a Zach Bogosian type. They could use a Luke type. They don't have necessarily that depth on the blue line that they'd like, and maybe they'd even like another depth forward. So I don't think the Leafs are done, but again, being right up against the cap, you have to get creative to make it work.
Sticking with the Leafs here, I wanted to ask you about a specific player, and you've already mentioned him once, but we'll circle back to Michael Bunting here. We talk about this rookie race, and people automatically go to Zegras or Raymond for good reason, right? Having great rookie seasons, but Michael Bunting's come in here. He's found himself a nice role, 33 points in 48 games for the Leafs. What have you made of his play and then his, you know, I guess, strike onto the rookie of the year?
Listen, I think Sam Cosentino said it best, my colleague. We're watching a Leaf game together and we're looking up at the screen, and Bunting's just getting in everyone's face. And Cosentino, with a big smile on his face, goes, "That guy is such a grease bag." And he meant that as a term of endearment, basically sending love to Bunting. You know, he plays hard. He plays with an edge. He plays fearless. And they've had great chemistry with that line. And arguably that line in the last month of Marner, Matthews, and Bunting, you know, second best to the Lindholm, Gaudreau, Tkachuk line in Calgary. It's probably the best line the last month in the NHL. They've just been so dynamic, so many elements. They grind you. You know, they get on you when you have the puck. They regain possession, and he's been a huge part of that. He's drawn, I think, the second or third most penalties in the league. He's been that perfect complement. And when we talked about Kyle Dubas hitting a home run, that was the home run. The fact you can ink this guy for this year and next at a very low price. He's a Scarborough kid, so he's got that synergy of playing at home. His buddy, homeboy, Wayne Simmons, another Scarborough guy riding, you know, shotgun with him. It's been like a perfect fit, and I think he's loving it. I mean, how many guys wouldn't want a perfect fit of playing with Matthews and Marner?
Right.
And you brought up the rookie of the year, and it's funny. I tweeted out, "Hey, you know, Michael Bunting leads all rookies, I think, with 15 or 16 goals." Whenever I tweeted it out, and it was met with, "Oh, he's 26. He's been in the league for 10 years." You know. And I get it, but bottom line is he fits the definition of what a rookie is. I don't
absolutely, yep.
And, you know, I think he'll be given some rookie of the year consideration. Do I think he'll win? No. Do I think he's the best rookie? Probably not. I mean, this defenseman in Detroit, Mo Seider, has been incredible.
Yes.
Lucas Raymond's been great in Detroit. Obviously, let's not forget about Zegras. Even Boldy now in Minnesota starting to make
a run. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a point-a-game guy in his short stint so far in the NHL. But Bunting will deserve and get some consideration, at least in my eyes. So it's great. He's found the perfect chemistry. He showed flashes of this last year in Arizona, but no one really took it seriously. It's under the spotlight. You're playing meaningless games for a franchise that's been just spinning its wheels for years now. And it's different to be doing this in Toronto where the games matter and there's a passion and a level of importance to these games. So I think it's been nothing but, spectacular so far for him.
For me, that's probably the steal of the offseason in Toronto, the way they brought Bunting in and how he's in that lineup. Incredible. You mentioned the Gaudreau, Lindholm line, so now I've got to go there. A little self-serving with the Flames listeners that I have on my show here. That line, and you talk about the Flames, it's automatically Gaudreau, it's automatically Tkachuk. But the guy on that line that I want to focus on doesn't get talked about enough in my eyes. I tweeted this out that Elias Lindholm is Mr. Everything from Calgary. So I'm wondering how he's viewed outside of this market from afar, from your guys' point of view. What have you made of Elias Lindholm this year for the Flames?
He's a brilliant player, brilliant. And he's so smart. And Johnny Gaudreau creates so much space because of the way he handles the puck. And Matthew Tkachuk creates so much space because of, you don't know what he's going to do. And, the big hits and just the fact that he's always on top of you. And he's smart because what Lindholm essentially does is he finds space. He likes the puck on his stick like everyone else, but he also knows to find space. And he knows these guys are both exceptional passers and they can find them. And we saw, the great backdoor pass, I think it was from Tkachuk on Saturday to Lindholm for, was that right? For his seventh straight goal. He's a smart player. And kudos to Brad Trey Living, because you talk about a value contract. What's he making? 4.8 or something like that?
Yes. Yeah.
For another 3 years, I believe, and right in the prime of his career. This is an exceptional player. And he's been such a good fit. And a lot was made of the trade with Carolina because it was such a big blockbuster trade. And it served both teams well. But clearly, Calgary, I guess you can say, at the end of the day, won that trade. And Lindholm is a marquee player and a perfect fit for that team. And what's interesting, John, is I didn't know how he was going to fit because Daryl Sutter, can be hard on guys. I think he's very fair, but I think some guys gravitate to that and some guys wilt under that situation. There was a lot of speculation. Daryl Sutter, this isn't going to go well for Johnny Gaudreau. I'm not sure it's going to go well for Lindholm. And who have been two of the best players under Daryl Sutter? Lindholm and Gaudreau, and they've thrived. So you just never know, right? And maybe that was a trumped up media thing, and we get a lot of things wrong in the media. And maybe that was one of them, where we just thought you kind of look at their personalities and wonder if it's going to fit. It's fit perfectly. And, the biggest thing there, obviously, in Calgary is Jacob Markstrom's back to being a world-class goalie. They didn't get that goaltending last year for a number of reasons. There was all sorts of problems between COVID and the chemistry of the new players. But this year, Tanev's been there now an extra year. Markstrom's been there an extra year. They've now gone out and added Toffoli. The chemistry seems fantastic. Guys are having career years, and the Calgary Flames, I know everyone wants to talk about Colorado being the favorites in the West, but if I'm a hockey player, I don't want to play Calgary in the playoffs because they're such a physical team. They are built for the playoffs. They have exceptional goaltending. They have great structure. They give up the least of anyone in the league. That's going to be an incredibly tough out. I don't care who they play. And the matchups aren't going to be easy for them. Whether they get, if they win the division, they might be crossed over to a pretty good St. Louis team, let's say, or a pretty good Nashville team, which will be an absolute war on the ice. But I'm not betting against Calgary. I can tell you that.
I can't wait for the playoffs. I believe it was Steve Dangle tweeted out in that last Flames versus Leafs game. He's like, the Leafs are the team you want in the regular season, but this Flames team is what you want in the playoff time, and how they dominate and they play and they don't quit. So incredible to see. We'll wait for the playoffs to see how that plays out, though. Wanted to quickly ask you about Mark Giordano. He came back to Calgary. Nice tribute by the Flames. Great hockey player. Your thoughts on Mark Giordano, and then maybe your guess on maybe where he might end up after the trade deadline?
Well, first of all, he's a great person, and I think that trumps everything. And I love his story, right? I have 2 kids, and this would be the story you tell. It's one thing to say, well, be like Sidney Crosby, be like Connor McDavid. Well, not everyone has that level of talent and is, kind of going to be on this path, and they've done everything to make sure that path stay true. But Mark Giordano, undrafted, unheralded, really forgotten guy, would have been very easy for him to just be gone.
Right.
He wouldn't allow that. And he has played hard. He's played an honest game. He plays through injuries. He's been a great leader. He gives back. He's compassionate. The community loves him. He's everything that embodies a captain, right? He was a great captain for Calgary for all those years. And he's been obviously a very strong captain in the first year in Seattle. So I love everything about him, the person, His game obviously is very strong. Is he the 2019 Norris, Mark Giordano? No. I mean, listen, he's 37, 38, or whatever, 37, 38 years old, right? Like, time does catch up to you. Would he be a great addition to a specific team for the trade deadline? Absolutely. Right. And when you ask me where he might end up, I don't know, but picture him in Carolina, right? Add to what's already a formidable blue line, to have that extra, guy there who, provides leadership and will work his butt off. And you also have like this other, well, let's get the cup for Gio, just like it was, let's get the cup for Ray Bork back in Colorado all those years ago. Like, it's not bad to add a guy like that to your lineup. Picture him in Colorado, right? Like, Joe Sakic understands what it's like when you add an all-star defenseman at the latter stages of his career, but an emotional leader, a support guy you can trust, a guy who can play both special teams. Like, those aren't bad things to be adding. I don't know where Giordano's going to end up, but I'm very confident that he's going somewhere. I don't think this is going to be, we're going to try and re-sign him and keep him in Seattle. I do think he'll be on the move. And I'm sure he'll have some say in this. I think he'll probably he's probably talked to management, and Ron Francis is probably like, we're thinking of moving you, but we want your blessing. We want this to be a comfortable two-way street. And I bet you Mark Giordano would be very comfortable doing that, because he wants to chase a championship and he knows he's on the clock. Do I think he's going back to Calgary? I don't think he's going to end up back in Calgary.
Yeah.
And I don't think, everyone had talked about possibly Edmonton, which would be like a great storyline. That's just going to be the storybook storyline, and they could 100% use a guy like Mark Giordano. I'm just not sure. They'd have to get creative of how that would work, whether there be some retention of salary or whatnot. But that would be sort of the fun storyline if you went to Edmonton and then they met in the playoffs. That would be really cool. But I'm not sure I'm not sure Edmonton is the leader in the clubhouse to get his services. I could certainly see him more. Possibly, like I said, in Colorado or Carolina. I could see those two teams very much vying for his services.
I had those two teams as well. I also had Pittsburgh in that conversation with his history he's had with Brian Burke, and he plays a very similar style to what they have in Pittsburgh right now. Last one for you, David. It's Black History Month, so I kind of want to rewind the clock a little bit. Willie O'Ree was honored earlier this season by the Boston Bruins with his number. So I just want to get your thoughts on Willie O'Ree and what he meant to the Black community and the hockey community as we push forward and try to keep this conversation going rather than just letting it go to the wayside. So just kind of an open-ended thing of your thoughts on Willie O'Ree and the message.
Well, it's great when you get a chance to see someone who's really made change and had a significant life and a meaningful life. And Willie O'Ree embodies all of that. He was also just given the highest civilian honor from the U.S. congressional honor that you could be given. I mean, it's not just what he's done is transcended hockey. This isn't a hockey award. And yes, we pay homage to his time in the NHL, but it's really about how he's changed lives. He's been arguably the greatest ambassador for the game of hockey we've seen. He spent the last 30 years essentially going out to communities, speaking to kids who maybe wouldn't have the exposure to hockey, maybe didn't feel comfortable or didn't know that there might be a way for them to be part of the game. And I'm not talking about getting to the NHL, but just the love of the game. Right. And he goes out to these communities and he embraces those kids and he lets them know his story. And it's meant the world to players. And you don't have to talk to anyone more than a Wayne Simmons or an Anthony Stewart. They looked at a Willie O'Ree, and that's why we have those players. You think of Anthony Duclair and some of the other young players in the game today, Keandre Miller, et cetera. And they look to Willie O'Ree and they say, he opened the door. I think it's fantastic. I think we obviously still have a long way to go, and we see there's still incidents and there's still problems, and not every kid of color probably feels that they belong in the game or they're allowed in the game or it's a safe place for them. But Willie O'Ree has done everything in his power to open those doors and to say, we welcome you. We want you. I've been through this. You can be through part of this as well. Hockey's given me so much and I've given so much back to the game, and I want you to be part of it. And I think that's his messaging. I've had a chance to interview him a few times and meet him a few times, and he is one of the most dignified and classy individuals I've ever come across. And he endured a lot, but he doesn't want to be a victim and talk about all those things, John. It's not about, I suffered this and I suffered that. Yeah. He wants to talk about what accomplishments he was able to achieve despite, despite the the roadblock standing in his way. So he's just a great example. You know, when I talked about talking to my kids about Mark Giordano and the path he took, you know, you also talk to them about a Willie O'Ree,
right?
The path he had to take, and he's paved the way for other young boys and girls to feel comfortable and safe and embrace this environment and be part of the game. I can't speak highly enough for him, and I know he always gets his due sort of during Black History Month. I'd love that it would be the whole year around. It wouldn't just, you know, for 28 days we sort of reflect on how important his achievements have been to the game, and I think we're working towards that. So. You know, I could spend a half hour talking about Willie O'Ree and the next legacy of guys are taking their cues from him. When you look at the Anthony Stewart, these young guys, and they're making a point of saying we're giving back and trying to get young kids, the next generation, involved as well. So it's pay it forward, and I love to see it.
Me too, as well. Really well done, David. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you giving me a few more minutes than what we actually planned for. Great conversation. Thanks so much for doing this, David, and we'll hopefully get you on again.
John, anytime. Enjoy the stretch run towards the trade deadline, and the playoffs, like you said, are going to be sensational. So thanks for having me on again.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today on another episode of the Double the Jock Show. Don't forget, later this week, coming up, Derek Wills, radio voice of the Flames, will join me on the show. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, and have yourself a great rest of your week.